If she stays, there will be trouble. If she goes, it will be double. Not necessarily, just to continue the song lyric, should she stay or should she go? We speak of Angela Rayner. I think we begin, will we, with a word on footballification. I'm a little bit obsessed by it. And, of course, just like you, I'm subject to it as well. We all are. Nobody is capable of leaving their proclivities and prejudices at the door, their biases or their beliefs. You can't do it. You can't sort of operate like an automaton. And what it is, if you don't know, is the rather sad spectacle in recent years of things becoming more extreme than ever when it comes to what you might describe as blind loyalty. So, for example, you used to be able, without any controversy at all, to respect and admire politicians with whom you disagreed. I think something probably broke forever in 2019 when Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson threw all the honest Tories out of the Tory party. There was a point at which it became increasingly difficult to regard any that remained with anything other than disapproval. Not contempt, but certainly disapproval. But it used to be a relatively easy thing to do. Footballification is the opposite of that. It's a word that I coined when I was watching. I kind of had PMQs in one eye and a football game in the other eye. And the contorted faces of football fans in some scenes. Often when a corner is being taken at the end that's populated by the opposing fans, and the hatred, the physical contortions of hatred on the faces of football fans when the player from the opposing team was preparing to take a corner, yards in front of them often. You don't often see that sort of hatred on your screens. Well, you didn't until the Farage riots kicked off and it became a bit of a national pastime to treat people who happen to have come here for a foreign country like opposing corner takers on a football pitch. But that contortion, and of course, you don't need to follow football to understand this, but it means that if your team does something wrong, then in your mind they didn't. So, your centre-back breaks both legs of the opposition striker and you start yelling abuse at the referee for calling a foul and showing your centre-back a yellow card. It's footballification. You cannot conceive of condemning or criticising your own side in some circumstances any more than you can conceive of praising or admiring the other side. And it has, I think we can all agree, it has infected politics in ways that feel a little bit unprecedented. It's why I welcome the election of the new leader of the Green Party and the continuing success of Ed Davey in front of the Liberal Democrats. It just sort of sets up a challenge, if you like, to the idea that there are only two scarves. Robert Jenrick and Nigel Farage currently sharing one. So I don't know whether the rise of reform adds to the notion of there being now more alternatives, because it's as if Enoch Powell didn't get fired by Ted Heath back in the 1970s and instead got promoted. 60s even. 70s. 60s? 70s? There you go. There's your first mystery. And it is Thursday, so Mystery Hour is on the way at 12 noon today. So the thing about footballification is this. You will answer the question of whether or not Angela Rayner should go, whether she should actually resign, already before the investigation by the independent ethics advisor is complete. According to feelings that you had and opinions that you held before you even knew she'd bought a flat in Hove. We can all fall into this trap. You will say, no, she shouldn't, because I really like Angela Rayner. I came quite close to saying that myself yesterday while warning about the perils of footballification. I think it's worth providing a little bit of context, especially for people pretending that her background and her class have no bearing on how she's treated by wealthy, white, right-wing, male, middle-class journalists and politicians. You remember when she was mocked for going to the opera. You remember when Boris Johnson saw not one but two resignations of independent. The old Etonian Boris Johnson had two independent ethics advisors resign in protest and disgust at his own conduct. He rode roughshod over the ministerial code. When his own cabinet were found to have broken it, he didn't refer them for investigation. On the contrary, he told his colleagues to form a square around the pritster. Such was his contempt for ethics, for integrity, for the rules. Whether or not the people that either sat on their hands or cheered that or pretended it wasn't a very big deal did so because they were enthralled to his old Etonian status or his masculinity or his poshness, his perceived poshness. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. But the idea that Angela Rayner is being treated the same is palpably absurd. But it doesn't let her off the hook any more than you admiring her, liking her, or thinking that she makes a very refreshing change to British politics should excuse her conduct. So what I'm saying, in a very roundabout way, is pretty straightforward. I don't want you to ring me if your answer to the question I'm about to ask is informed by positions that you held before you even knew that Angela Rayner had bought a flat. I want your opinion, I want your position, I want your answer to my question to be... And listen, I mean, I don't even know if I'm capable of doing this, so... I know it's a big ask, and I'm not going to be penalising you if I think that you may be failing the test, but it's just so much more interesting, isn't it? If you're actually responding to the facts as opposed to the feelings or the prejudices or the biases that were in place before this happened. And I can't get past Rayner Ali, the homelessness minister who, I mean, we could say resigned, but I think who was required to resign by Downing Street because of hypocrisy over the way she handled rent increases on a house she owns in East London. These are really tricky times, and I know in the interest of bias, I should probably also point out that some of us on the left hold our own people to much higher standards than many people on the right hold their people, and sometimes that feels like such a stupid thing to do. You know, you think about the people that were tickling Boris Johnson's toes when he was corrupting every single corner of the Prime Ministerial office and indeed the Prime Ministerial estate. More crimes committed at Downing Street in breach of COVID laws that they introduced than at any other address in the entire kingdom. I am truly extraordinary. People still defend him, still break bread with him, still treat him with anything other than the contempt he so obviously deserves. But you can't use that as a fig leaf. You can't say, well, they let their lot off the hook all the time, so we should let our lot off the hook as well. It almost curdles you sometimes to... you look at Farage as well, committing what is pretty close to treason in America yesterday, getting his absolute backside handed to him by a variety of American politicians, lying under oath to Congress, as far as I can tell. And you know, there is a temptation to think, well, if you can't beat them, join them. Maybe our lot should be more populist. Maybe they should start riding roughshod over the truth. Maybe the Democrats should start telling blatant lies as an antidote to Trump's complete dishonesty. But you just can't. You've got to be better. It may not have done her any favours, but when they go low, we go high is how some people have to live. It's how they're constructed. It's how they're made. So I want you to tell me why you think Angela Rayner should either resign or not resign. I'll even allow you to be a little bit boring. If you want to make the argument that we should wait until the independent ethics advisor has delivered his verdict, then I'll take at least one call making that point as well. But let me begin. Let me go first, if you would, while you prepare to call 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. I felt that Rayner Ali was right to resign, or that Keir Starmer was right to demand her resignation, even though she did nothing wrong. And that sounds odd, doesn't it? But there was this, and the more you found out about what happened, if you don't remember the story, it was only last month. She was trying to sell her house. She offered the people staying there the opportunity to have a sort of rolling contract, which would mean that they'd have to move out the minute that the sale was completed. They said no. They moved out. She failed to sell the house, so she relisted it as a rental property, and the agency that were handling the deal advised her that she could charge quite a lot more per month than she had been charging her previous tenants. One of the previous tenants went to the papers, understandably aggrieved that an actual homelessness minister had contributed to a phenomenon that contributes to homelessness, i.e. sort of gouging rent or raising rent simply because you can, particularly against the backdrop of the previous tenants having moved out. Now, it's defensible, and it is certainly not illegal, and it's entirely understandable, but it's stank. And this is where I worry about what you might call anti-footballification. Are some people, myself included, so desperate not to indulge in the kind of prejudice and bias beloved of the right? Many on the right and many on the left, actually. That's not a fair question. If you think back to some of Jeremy Corbyn's core support, the idea that he could ever do anything wrong would be absolutely anathema to them. Bless them. You then end up being too critical, a bit like the BBC. You know, when the BBC interview their own people and like the chairman of the BBC ends up having to resign because John Humphreys has given him such a kicking. Imagine how people like Rupert Murdoch or whoever owns GB News or Viscount Rothermere at the Daily Mail feel when they actually see head honchos at the BBC being hauled over the coals by their own journalists to the point where their positions become untenable. It's about marking your own homework much more strictly than you would ever mark anybody else's. And that is a worry. That's what I mean about the Curdle contingent, that idea that you're actually going too far to prove that you haven't got your scarf tied so tightly around your neck that it's cut off the flow of blood to your head. And I want you to tell me if you think that I am doing that today, because I am about to tell you that I think Angela Rayner's position is untenable. And I don't know for sure that I am not subconsciously marking her homework more strictly than I would mark somebody else's, because I'm so worried about being biased. I don't know for sure. It's why, in some ways, the answers to the question of whether she should go from people saying no, she shouldn't, will be of particular interest to me today. But when you tell me why you think she should or shouldn't, I really want a little bit of detail. It's not going to be evidence in the sense that we know exactly what her advice was. As I see it, it breaks down into three possibilities. She followed legal advice and paid what she thought she was liable to pay and did not clarify any of the questions raised by the media because of the court order that is in place. So that leaves three possibilities. The first is that she told everybody she was taking advice from on both tax and conveyancing. Here's something I've never said on the programme before. I wonder if there are any expert conveyancers listening to the programme who might help us out with this. The fact that the Manchester home was in trust meant that she couldn't describe the Hove home as her primary residence, despite the fact that she no longer has any money invested in the Manchester house. That's in trust for her children. But she still lives there when it is her turn to care for her disabled son. That's the bit that was subject to a court order. Nobody was allowed to talk about that, including her, because she had, I presume, taken it out to protect her privacy. And that was overturned on Tuesday night. And the second possibility is that she took advice and ignored it, in which case her position is obviously untenable. And the third, and this is where I think the clever money is at the moment, the third is that she possibly didn't tell the conveyancer, the person telling her that she didn't have to pay stamp duty on a second home, that she had put her first home into trust. And that's pretty complicated, right? That's why I think yesterday morning I told you I had absolutely none of my colleagues could tell me what exactly it was that she was supposed to have done wrong. And what she has done wrong is not the thing that she was accused of. Nobody, I don't think, is claiming that she has deliberately sought to minimise her tax requirements fraudulently, but she did not pay the tax she should have paid on a house purchase, and she's the housing minister. And I don't think there's any way you can dice that makes her position look defensible this morning. I really don't. She's the housing minister, and she deprived the Inland Revenue of about £40,000 on a housing transaction. I saw one argument that she should resign because she bought a second home as a sort of point of socialist principle. That, to me, is quite obnoxious because it completely ignores the unique status of her family arrangements, for which you can feel nothing but sympathy. Her and her ex-husband share the care of their son, and they do so on a rota basis. So she actually has two genuine homes, plus, of course, the grace and favour apartment that comes with the job, but she only owns one. She only has a financial stake in one building. I got a colleague of mine, clever lad. I said, how many houses does she own? He said 3. I said, where are you getting that idea from? He goes, I've read it everywhere. She's got 3 houses. How many does she own? 1. Well, she's got a mortgage on 1, a flat in Hove. She doesn't own the place in Manchester, and she obviously doesn't own the grace and favour apartment either. But none of that matters. She is the housing minister. Mate of mine messaged me yesterday. I think I told you, and he's a clever lad. He's done it 2 or 3 times recently. He did it on ID cards as well, on that argument about, oh no, we can't bring in ID cards when we've got a nice government, because imagine what a nasty government would do with them. And he just said, well, surely a nasty government would bring them in straight away. I love brains like a laser. They just cut straight to the heart of things. Goodness knows how he'd cope with a 20-minute monologue at the top of a radio show when he answers the question in the first 30 seconds. And it's the same thing here. If you were Angela Rayner, you'd say to everybody involved in this process, is there anything here that could come back and bite me on the arse? Pardon my French, bite me on the backside. Is there anything here? You don't understand. You've not had a client like me before. You don't just need to cross the T's and dot the I's. You need to cross the T's 12 times. You need to dot the I's 100. And she is the housing minister, and she didn't do that. So unless you think that Rushanara Ali shouldn't have resigned over that rent hike story, I don't see how you can think that Angela Rayner should stay in her job, even if it turns out she received duff advice. Because, well, this is the bit where I wonder whether I'm sounding a bit bonkers. Even if it turns out that she received duff advice, she should have done more to make sure that she didn't. But can you really hang on as housing minister when you have blown it on this sort of scale?